the City Council work session to order. Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilperson Whitman. Here. Echoangeli. Here. Vining. Here. Germaini. Here. Lamore.
Here.
Felder.
Here.
Mayor Clark.
Here. Thank you, Clerk Lavoy. And Mr. Pasto, I know you have several items on here and maybe a couple of add-on items as well if you want to start with that, and we'll move right through the list.
There will be a couple items on the back end. First item is discussion regarding proposed ordinance to prohibit sale of e-cigarettes. Mr. Packard.
As Mark gets ready there, just a reminder as we speak, we have to hit the button to the green to make sure that we're speaking. Thank you.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, City Council, Mark Cochran, Assistant City Manager. As you know, previously, toward the end of 2018, myself, Vicki Loveland with the Monroe County Substance Abuse Coalition, Julie Everly with Monroe Public Schools, and Chief McCormick brought a proposal to you based on the possibility of a Senate Bill 37, that was moving through the legislature to prohibit the sale and possession of e-cigarettes and vape products by minors. Unfortunately, that bill did not move in the lame duck and it died. So there's nothing currently introduced at the state legislature, although we're hopeful something will be introduced this year as a companion bill to what died last year. But what City Administration is bringing before you today is a proposed draft ordinance that administration worked with City Attorney Matt Budds on that would amend Chapter 659, Article 1, regarding the sale and possession of tobacco by minors. So I've handed out a copy of the draft ordinance for you to take a look at, but I'm just going to go through quickly and give you an overview of what the amendments include. It does add the definition of an alternative nicotine product, a tobacco product, and a vapor product, an e-cigarette product. That definition is on the screen, but you'll also see that in the draft ordinance. It includes basically an electronic cigarette or a vape product that's commonly on the market available now. Unfortunately, right now, it is against the law at the federal level to sell or possession of a minor to have an e-cigarette or vape product, but there is no bill in the state to allow state police or local law enforcement to enforce that federal act, and that's why there's the need for the local or a statewide bill to pass. So it does amend the ordinance as well, that no person under the 18 shall purchase or attempt to purchase, possess or attempt to possess, use or attempt to use on public property, including public place of business or amusement, and prohibits a minor from presenting or offering to present a false proof of age to purchase or possess a cigarette, other tobacco products, alternative nicotine products, and vapor products or tobacco in any form. This does not apply in instances where minors are taking place in a employer-sponsored internal enforcement activity that has the previous approval of the prosecutor's office, or a police agency enforcement activity, or the handling or transport of said products due to a matter of employment. It also prohibits the sale to minors of all the defined tobacco products, including vape products. Retail establishments currently are not allowed to sell to minors according to our ordinance, and it also requires retail establishments to post a sign saying that they do not sell or sell tobacco products or vape products to minors. The violation for a business who is found to sell tobacco products or vape products is a $50 fine for each offense, and there's no change in that. Further, it goes on to prohibit the purchase and possession of these products by minors. The violation is a misdemeanor that's punishable by a $50 fine for each offense. For the second and the third offense, the punishment is also that the youth must participate in a health promotion or risk reduction program, and the court may also order community service of 16 hours for the first offense, 32 for the second offense, and 48 hours for the third offense. That's also currently in our ordinance as well. It'll just expand to vape products now as well. So the way that the ordinance is read, that those community service hours can be performed in a hospice, nursing home, or long-term care facility, and/or picking up tobacco product refuse and litter in the city under the direction of our Parks and Rec Department or the DPS department. So that's an overview of the draft ordinance. Wanted to get your feedback and open it up for discussion tonight. I think one of the things that we'd like to talk about, and Vicki Loveland with the Substance Abuse Coalition is here again tonight, is to talk about that community service portion. Do we want to limit it to only hospice and healthcare facilities? Since this ordinance was first adopted, there's been a lot of changes in the healthcare industry, including HIPAA and other federal laws. Do we want to limit the locations that youth are allowed to perform their community service, or do we want to open it up to other locations as well? So, Vicki, if you want to talk about the funding that's available too for the ordinance.
Good evening. I just wanted to mention, Mark and I have talked at length. He is the chair for the Monroe County Substance Abuse Coalition. And so in creating our budget for this current year, we were able to send, and actually it's approved, to have $2,000 to utilize for either putting some educational materials together for retailers or for parents, and also signage if such an ordinance is passed. That can be used for the entire county of Monroe. Obviously, we would take a look if this ordinance is passed to be able to utilize some of that money for retailers here in the city of Monroe.
Okay, well, thanks.
Yep.
And I know that the council had a we had a previous work session on the introduction to this. This is a little more than the language. I'll just make a first comment, see if there's comments from the council. But, you know, looking at that item, when you talk about, it says hospice, nursing home, and health, or long-term care facilities, you know, putting in a broader sense of healthcare related activities or facilities might have a broader ability to show the youth, if they're involved, the things that are going on, than just those specifics. So it's not a bad comment to make, that maybe a consideration. Look and see if there's other comments from council too. Yeah, Councilwoman Devine.
I think it should be expanded because there might not be enough access to those particular facilities. And there's plenty of other facilities that do community service. I don't think it should be limited. I understand that it's related to health, but like you said, with the privacy laws, there might be limits on who can come in, and then there might be age restrictions in the health facilities. So just a suggestion that we open it up further.
Yeah. Other comments or questions from the council members for Vicki or Mark? So I'm going to look at Vince for a second here, and obviously this is a discussion in a work session of what we might see here soon in council. I don't know if there's a timeline that you're looking for, and Mark or Vince can say what the next steps are.
Well, the intent tonight obviously was to kind of introduce the ordinance, get some feedback on a couple of the items that were referenced, but the intent is to have it introduced at the next meeting as a first reading of the ordinance for consideration to go toward adoption.
Thanks, Your Honor. I got a question primarily for Matt. I'm looking at, I guess for reference, it'd be starting at line 204, where it talks about the misdemeanor. My understanding is that a person that sells it can be charged with a misdemeanor. If a kid is caught with it, it's a municipal civil infraction. You know, kids are kids. I would hate to do something that would impair their ability, like filing for a college application, where something shows up that they did something like this. So does a municipal civil infraction show up on any type of reporting system?
Your Honor, two things. One, first off, the use by a minor, so that would be what's in section 659-2 of the proposed ordinance. So that's the attempted purchase, use, or possession by minors. If you look in the around line 161, that would actually say that is a misdemeanor. And the reason why some of these penalties are the way that they are is that this is based off of the state's Youth Tobacco Act. And so we're trying to not be inconsistent with that act for purposes of separating cigarettes or other tobacco use from the vaping products. So essentially, those penalties are consistent with what the penalties would be under state law if a minor was found in possession of, say, cigarettes or chewing tobacco or things like that.
So a young adult that's caught vaping could be faced with a misdemeanor.
If this ordinance were to go into effect, yes, and that's consistent with if they were caught with, say, a pack of cigarettes.
That's pretty disruptive to a career. I mean, I personally, I just think it's pretty disruptive. I mean, I don't believe in vaping. I don't think kids should be doing it. But then on the other hand, I don't think if kids, kids are kids. And if they get caught, they have a misdemeanor on their record, could have an impact on their college education and on future employment for doing something dumb. So I'm just bringing it up. I mean, these things have, something like this, I mean, like I said, I don't think kids should be doing it, but on the other hand, these have unintended consequences that go along with it, that maybe a 14 or 15-year-old isn't going to think about.
Well, at that age, it'd be a juvenile, and so I'd look into Mr. Buds if there's if there's a difference and how that difference would be.
Your Honor, so I mean, the other thing is, you would also look at, are there what I'm going to call pretrial diversion kind of things that could happen? Could they do community service and have a deferred, approach to the penalty, that sort of thing? I'll tell you, going back, the challenge that I had in adding vaping to what we already have in terms of tobacco is I didn't want to create, and this was just, I guess, my approach to putting this draft ordinance together, didn't want to separate other tobacco use from the vaping use and say, shouldn't, at least in my opinion, should those be treated consistently? So is a pack of cigarettes different from a vape product? I guess in my mind, the answer is no. And so then we have to look at, all right, if we're not going to change to be inconsistent with state law from I'll call it traditional tobacco standpoint, then we're kind of faced with putting vaping into those same categories that already exist.
So, Matt, so is there a difference in, say, 17, which is considered adult, than I say a 16 and younger in here?
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, so you would have then juvenile versus adult proceedings at that point in time also.
So to be a 17-year-old those particular offenses would be, it would start there. There's still the potential if the court or the discussion allows it, as you said, community service in lieu and whatever they might be, the court may be accommodated with, but that's outside the control of that. It starts there. Where it ends is could be a variety of items. Paula?
I commend the work of the Substance Abuse Coalition, and I know that this is a very difficult area. And when it comes to vaping, it's been my experience that there is a huge difference between that and a pack of cigarettes because of the amount of nicotine that is inhaled during vaping. I mean, I've known kids that thought their friends had overdosed and died because, and then they managed to bring them back. But it was a pretty close situation that, that when it's nicotine, it's not the same as smoking a cigarette. It's not the same as what's in a pack of cigarettes. It's a lot more. But, so I know that this is going to be a period of adjustment and there's no perfect way. And but my question is, what about the people that sell it to them? Do we have any idea what's waiting for them? Because that's been an ongoing problem.
Well,
Sure,
I
please
just want to
do.
comment because we work closely with John Bazil, who is with the Student Assistance Program through the Monroe County ISD, and he takes referrals from the schools from the entire county, and I ask him for a monthly update that typically takes place at our coalition meetings. And vape pens, wax pens, marijuana is also being found in these devices, and I've questioned John because he runs weekly groups. Where do you think the students are getting them from? And he said either online, could be retail shops, or they're having someone such as an older adult passing it down to them as well, who may have a medical marijuana card. So That's a good question that you pose because the concern, are they really getting it from retailers? Um, we don't have a definitive data on that, but I definitely think it's a start in the right direction.
Let's see if there's other questions or comments from the council. Andrew?
As, you know, the Monroe County Substance Abuse Coalition, I would imagine that you're proposing similar language to the other municipalities in the community. And specifically with regards to Monroe Public Schools, because I know that you guys are working with Superintendent Everly. The high school is Monroe Township, but the middle school is in the city limits. So if you are caught vaping at the middle school, you can be charged and fined, but if you're at the high school doing the exact same thing, you can't. That and then the fine structure that would be in place, I think it would just be more consistent for the entire community in the county if the language was the same. And I was wondering if you were working on anything with other municipalities as well.
We actually had conversations with a Board of Commissioner member for the county, and the main goal would be to have a countywide ordinance adopted. So it would be enforced countywide, not just municipality by municipality.
Thank you. I guess.
Ideally, it'd be nice if the state moved.
Yeah,
but
ideally.
in lieu of that.
While it didn't get acted on during the last session or in lame duck, that there's an opportunity for, at least as we move forward here, to make sure that's shared with our representative and senator. And while we take this important stance, if that's what council wishes to do, that we make sure that it gets passed forward to the state levels to see if maybe what their interest is and potentially champion a statewide, which would address Andrew's position as well, not position, but his point was well taken. Other comments? Very good. Thank you for the presentation, Vince, and we'll move forward and see what, maybe in that one section, what you might come up with, some other broader perspectives, some environmental action and others. Thank you. Yeah. Mr. Pastu.
Thank you, Your Honor. Next item is discussion regarding the Labor Park project and the growing budget with it. I provided a handout for each of you. I know we've had some discussion previously. My intent was to have Mark Russell here tonight, but I think that we've got a couple of different layouts to consider. But I wanted to start by saying when we originally started with this project based on the park plans that were presented back in 2017, you were looking at a project of just a little under $600,000. Well, excuse me, in the interim, we've acquired the adjoining 6 parcels to the south there on 2nd. We've got a larger parking lot to complement the ALCC and also the Navarre Library. The water feature has been added, and then also part of what with the 2nd Street is adding the utility relocation that you have lines running down East 2nd Street. So when you look at the first plan there, you can see the one large box there right in the middle at the bottom. That would be the ALCC, and then also the Navarre Library there. Well, what's proposed here is a parking lot sufficient to serve not only the patrons of the library and staff as well as the ALC, but even individuals that would be attending the park. You'll note as you proceed to the west of that, that's an area where a lot of the community garden is. That's programmed to remain pretty much the same. And then the core of the park area is filled in there, and you can see the center circular area is roughly where the water feature is. This cost estimate came in over a little $1.1 million. And so we've been trying to work it back, and it struggled with a couple of concepts. The next slide would provide you a much smaller parking lot, a lot of unprogrammed area, particularly to the west. Doesn't include the water feature. All of these could be additions at a later point in time, but a much smaller scale project than what we had. And you can see, again, just by the area where 2nd Street would have been, we've added pretty sizable area to the programmed use here. candidly, this project still came in over $900,000. And to be candid with you, the first plan is, I think, far better long-term for this site development. And, we came up working this afternoon, Mr. Sell, Mr. Green, and Matt Wallace, looking at a number of sources to come up with the funding needed to do the first plan. So what I want to do is get your feedback on this. We need to give Mr. Russell some direction on how to proceed with the design. We're probably a little further along than we are behind where we would want it to be at this point in time. But I put that out there. We can come up with a financing plan to come up with the 1.1 plus project cost to go forward. So thoughts, comments, suggestions?
Let's see if there are any comments from council first. I might want to see the first one again, but we'll,
go back-
okay, let's go back to the first one then. That's what his first comment was. Please, thank you.
Your Honor, my comments are, if we're gonna do it, let's do it right. I mean, I like the larger parking lot in alternative one because I think that gives us the opportunity, or gives ALCC the opportunity to increase programming at the gym for other activities like volleyball, basketball, some things to bring in people in the evening. They used to do that there at the ALCC. They used to have basketball, and the city used to run their volleyball program out of the gym, or at least one of the volleyball programs. Other thought is, out of the additional funding, are we in a position to ask the DTE Foundation for $250,000?
Well, we hadn't approached them.
I know in other communities, DTE does throw money in through their foundation into projects. I would suggest that we at least approach them for possible funding. I guess my other comment, and this would be something for council to consider, is when I saw that we were going to discuss Labor Park in the manager's memo. Labor Park, the name for it came up because across the street from the park was the Laborers Hall. Laborers Hall is no longer there. There's a Laborers Museum downtown. I'm wondering, in the kind of the tradition of naming some of the parks after mayors, that we'd name this park Mignano Park after Sam Mignano, who was a longtime council person from the 3rd Precinct, big supporter of ALCC, big supporter of the Winchester Street corridor, had his business there, and he lived over on 4th and Winchester. And I think this type of park, this type of design would be something that would be a nice memory or memorial, not only used for the community, but a nice memorial to all the work and all of the community service Sam did over his long career as a councilman and as mayor.
I'll make a comment to that, and then I do want to see the second one again, but before I change it. So periodically we get, at the city hall, and the administration, myself, get calls about naming, whether it be parks or other items. And I see Mr. Green's here. I know that we have a kind of a policy in place that we maybe, when we talk about Labor Park, and if there's going to be a transition of a name from Labor Park or not, that we kind of follow through that. I think there's been a couple other names that have been raised as well, and I think there's an opportunity to kind of take that all in together. John, so your comment about renaming, I think, is the time for that consideration. I know that Mr. Pastu and I kind of chatted about that because I've had some visits. So I think that as we put that together, I think it's an opportunity for, through that process of our, it's not, I'm trying to think of the name of the policy now, but it's about how we go through that to make sure it meets all that criteria. So I think it's a good comment to make, that we start to consider that and maybe start that process, and something that city manager and myself can get with Mr. Green to make sure that's followed. But I think there's, I know there's a couple others that have, at least in this conversation about the transition, and what a great opportunity to make sure it is done right, as you say, but also that we take a lot to consider. But that is definitely one that's come up in the past, as well as a couple others. I'm sorry, I want to see number 2 again, please, and then we can come back to 1 and see if there's other council comments. Okay, it was looking back and forth, so we can go back to 1 then. Thanks. Kelly?
Yes, I think the parking lot, the larger parking lot is very important because the center still does the basketball leagues as well as, I think we have 2 or 3 volleyball leagues. I think we used to have several more, and I think that's gonna increase. So those parking lots are completely full when we do the Sunday basketball leagues and the volleyball leagues on Mondays nights, Wednesday nights, and also, we host the funeral dinners, and that's a ongoing thing that we do, and so the parking lot gets a lot of use. We use it at the library as well. Our patrons use it. And if that street is gonna, access is gonna be blocked to Second Street, I think it's important to have the larger parking lot. I agree with John, if we're gonna do it, we might as well do it right. And, what else? I'm still, really hoping for the water feature, so, and then, not only DTE Energy Foundation, but the entire port, seems to be doing well, bringing a lot of revenue in. Uh, I think we should approach them to, I don't know if we would go directly through Paul Lamar or go through the individual corporations there, but I think there's money to be had to help us in the neighborhood that's directly adjoining the port. And I don't know if we've reached out to them in that capacity.
No, we've
or
kept
not.
it I'm sorry, we've kept it internally heretofore, the financing with this project, but mostly CIP and CDBG funding. I think CDBG funding is about $500,000 of local funding, so.
I spoke with Brian briefly about going to the port and asking, can they support, would they be willing to support projects in the neighborhood right there? So that's my thoughts.
Thank you. I know that we'll probably get a copy of this, and vision's pretty good, but if you can help me out just on a couple of the items, I think that center circle, it might be a J and what that is, and then north at the kind of the brownish, oh, thank you. That's
It's the water feature.
it. J is, okay, thanks. That helps. I was trying to see what the L and the J, and I think the brown area, I see you. Okay.
I have
Yes.
a few questions
Brian.
regarding this. I know that in previous discussions, we've talked about that water feature, where it was a smaller water feature, we made it a little larger. Is that this concept here?
It's a smaller scale than, I think, clearly, the numbers even came in higher. We started working back to get it down to a little over 1.1, but yeah, this is a little bit smaller in area with than what we initially had talked about. So it's
And as far as cost goes, if we thought about just doing, maybe enlarging the parking lot versus the water feature, what's the difference there?
yeah, if you look on the second one, that's clearly what, one of the alternative is shrinking both the parking lot and taking out the water feature. And even at that, we still struggle. I thought we took the water feature out on that.
Well, I think you misunderstand me. What I'm thinking of is keeping the parking lot that larger size.
Yeah.
But taking out the water feature. What's the difference cost-wise there?
It's probably gonna be a little over $100,000
So the water feature is basically about $100,000.
over that, just, yeah, when you get the plumbing and the surface area installed, yeah.
Because in previous conversations, we have also discussed possibly putting the water feature with the new fire station as well.
That was discussed, yes. I think we didn't pursue it. We know long-term part of the programming would be ultimately having the police station located on that site, and they are in close proximity to one another. So.
Well, I think the benefit of having the water feature in is it's going to be used in the summertime, and that's when the kids hopefully would be using the ALCC for lunch programs. And so this would become a kind of a hub for the kids in the neighborhood. With the gym and the library, the water feature tot lot, this would be a activity hub for the neighborhood kids. Could be pretty interesting, actually.
Brian?
The other features that are there as well, I clearly see the water feature, but what else do we have in the park itself? Do we have any play equipment, anything like that that's being thought about?
There is some area particularly, I can't control this, you can
L.
just focus in on,
What do you want, the park itself?
let's
or
go
the
back to the
list?
first one if you
First
could.
one, yes,
That would
thank
be,
you.
it's got more of,
Okay, is that the first one? Yeah. So do you want the park part bigger,
yeah,
larger?
if you could. And then maybe blow it up a little bit more. So there's kind of an open area there. I think the pavilion is,
L.
where do we got that at?
And what's I? I is the playground?
Yeah,
Is that a rubberized surface?
it looks to be, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the way I'm looking at this, J, is that water feature's at grade, so
Mhm.
when that water feature's not in use, that becomes part of a plaza where people can walk through it?
Yeah.
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 Okay.
And part of it is too, is you can see that sidewalk there on the right end of it. At one point, we were looking to connect that to the building. We kind of left that if there is any additions that may take place with the community center building, that would be the time to finish up and connect there. Again, there was some reductions that came out of this to allow for some future flexibility with that. So, we tried to make it as functional as possible, incorporating the water feature in the playground area in the pavilion, but and then also the parking that went with it. So,
Other questions or comments? Brian?
I agree with Councilman Michelangelo. I think that possibly finding some community help in this might be a wise decision on our part to help us out, especially with some of the things that are unknown in our budget yet. So I think further research on that might help in our decision-making here.
well, let me back up a here. What I'm looking for is some direction from a design standpoint. If this is the preference, I can have Mr. Russell and his firm proceed with the design, and then we can talk further about the financing if we can find other alternatives for consideration. And then you may have to either, maybe consider what's being suggested here, defer another year, and or maybe go through a DNR grant or something like that, but that would put it into 2020 at that point, so.
2021.
Yeah, 2021 at this point, you're right.
Well,
John?
you could design it, you could bid it, and then bid it with alternates or deducts, right?
Yep.
Okay, if the financing isn't in place, we can have alternates that we can pull things out, add things in.
Yep.
Yeah.
My
thought
thought
we-
is it looks, I like the way it looks in the one that's on the screen.
There you go. That's where I'm at.
So if you're okay with that, we'll work in this general framework with the design, and then we'll try and figure out the final design, or financing details
Yep.
on the back end, and, but we'll approach these other organizations, see if there's any possibilities.
I think, Vince, if I can recall, and maybe Mark can check it, or maybe we go through the Community Foundation, they could check it. I think the Kellogg and the Kresge Foundation, I believe that they provide money for projects like this, especially in neighborhoods that have, that are low mod income, I believe. And it's not worth, it's worth asking.
Okay, yep.
Very
That's all I
good.
got. With that,
Thank you. And thank you, Michelle. Your next item.
Next item is just a general discussion. Last month, or actually in November, City Council adopted an ordinance to opt out regarding recreational marijuana establishments. And the question is, okay, where do we go from here? And then, more importantly, how do we get there? I put out there a suggestion that we consider, having more of a professional community facilitation as to what types of establishments the community would consider, where in relationship to, schools, neighborhoods, churches, parks, those type of things. But it is a big land use consideration. And, as I put into my report to council, I'm probably not the one to lead this facilitation because I probably am not very objective in my opposition to it. But I do think that you do need to give some consideration to having this discussion, what type of establishments you might contemplate. And again, my worry is always having, the loud voice dominate the policy direction and consideration. And so I throw that out there for discussion on how the city council would like to approach it. That was my suggestion, but I'm certainly open to however you like to go forward with it.
So I'll start, and as I see if there's comments from council, as we know that as Proposal 1 passed, within that was the opportunity for municipality, township, or otherwise to opt out. That was in the language to do so, but also in that language is the opportunity for a resident to circulate a petition to override the opt-out or action by an administration or by municipality. So I think Mr. Pastu's I guess point and objective is, we should be prepared knowing what decisions the council may make in the future with information that's gained, but also information or action that may be external that may impact and have the council having to make some decisions. Having this community facilitation starts to collect that information, but also starts from a council, but also I could see planning commission and other boards kind of weighing in, as well as if that comes to be, where would the locations be according to the residents of the city, and is there such a location, and how do you find that? So facilitation gains the information and allows there some I'll just say discussion on what might happen or could happen, and are we prepared for it? So that's kind of my assessment as I look at it. So I'm looking to council. We'd kind of give it back to the administration to find somebody to facilitate, but also work on the structure. It's not something that's going to happen tomorrow, but it's something that we obviously can't sit on either, because you never know what might occur. So comments from council.
Yes, I think
John?
we need to facilitate the conversation. I'm assuming this would be well within your limits as a city manager, your purchasing limits.
15,000?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would hope so.
You're within that, so you don't really, I'm thinking it's, to get a facilitator to do some sessions is shouldn't cost all that much, but I think we should proceed and have that conversation.
Right. I think we're going to have to, and I don't think it's just about having conversation and hear what people want to say. We need that information, but then you have to really get down and look at it and say, if there's messaging for that, where in the city? And again, it may not come to that decision, but if it does, we need to be prepared.
Yep.
Brian, you had a comment? Or
I just would like to involve our law enforcement too, and get some personal some of their ideas, what they think would help facilitate them in some ways.
You can see it's a broad discussion that you really have to take all components into effect. Is it residential? Is it commercial? Is it industrial? Is it open vacant land? Is it in the neighborhoods? Is it, in relation to how the proposal 1 stated, in fact, of distance from schools and other locations? And you just aren't going to be able to throw something at a map and say, there it is. I think it takes this discussion.
Well, part of the facilitation on this issue is, if we have a community engagement, we're going to end up with people that are pro and con medical or recreational marijuana, and that's been decided already. I think the issue here is we have to frame kind of the discussion is that we're going to have recreational marijuana, we're going to have retail or dispensaries, and I guess the conversation is, where's the most appropriate location in the community to have those? And what are the land use, the zoning implications, the neighborhood implications? That's the kind of discussion that we have to have without getting into the pro and the con.
Right. That's been decided, as you said. Yeah. Kelly, comment?
That was my question. Is this a land conversation.
That's the intent, yes.
So if we facilitate this, will we be inviting certain key people, or will it be a public?
Well, I think part of it is, and again, you know, I've come to probably over the years appreciate good facilitators and how they can get all of the stakeholders to have their say regarding these issues, but also, you know, be structured so that it can ultimately lead this council to a decision. But you know, I do think it is primarily a land use matter, and how do you go about, you know, keeping it within that context and structure.
Your Honor.
So, Brian?
One last thing regarding that too is, Colorado has had this, as law for a couple of years now. Might be wise of us to maybe follow some of the steps that some of their cities have taken, or maybe some of the steps they've taken, maybe not follow. But at least maybe give us some guidance to see how that is working for them and how it can work for us.
Thank you. And as we know, the rules by the state have not been written yet as well. And then we've got that, they have until the end of 2019 to do so. So it gets us starting to think about that. And then as that comes along, how does that work as well? I mean, it's as we've started from the beginning, this really was a challenge, at least for me, to move into this with moving forward when you don't know what the rules of the are going to be and how it can be. And so this is just being proactive, in my opinion, just as we were last time, to make sure that when we make a decision, that we're doing with as informed decision makers with the information that comes in, and that's why the facilitation gets us there. My thoughts. So I'm supportive of community facilitation and doing it in a manner that gets us down the road in a again, as John says, it's not about it's here. Recreational was approved. Now what? How do you? How does it work within the community? Other comments, Andrew?
Yes, thank you, sir. I think at the core of this, what we're really trying to find out is we're trying to listen to the community and get their thoughts and have some idea on where they would like to see these facilities if they're to be licensed and put within city limits. And I believe that listening to the community is not in small part what all of us were elected to do. I know that the city of Dearborn had the same issue in front of them, and they just did a town hall and were able to perfectly and happily facilitate the conversation on their own. And I don't believe this to be an exercise outside of the expertise of this body. I think that we can do this. I don't think that we need to pay an outside facilitator. But it sounds like I'm the only one here that is of that opinion. I just think that this is something that we might be able to handle by ourselves. I think people are smart. I understand Councilman Icoangeli's concerns about individuals are just going to come in, residents are going to come in and say, I'm either for or against marijuana. I think that I have some faith in the mayor and the city manager's abilities to say, that's not what we're here to discuss. That's been decided already at a state level. We're just here to discuss land use, to discuss licensure, and how to proceed in terms of the city's role on this issue. I think people are smart enough to get that. I just think this is something we could handle. That's all, sir. Thanks.
Okay. And so maybe as I'm looking at the city manager, this is what we're here for, is the discussion. I haven't said whether we should, facilitate through a facilitator or internally. I'm open to both options. I'd like to maybe have some examples of that, like Dearborn and how that was done, something administration can look into. If there's a facilitation that's been done elsewhere, how was it done? Who was it done by? What was the cost for that? I think then we can start getting all the information before we comes to us to make that decision. I think it's just getting information that we're starting down this path to make sure that we do it in a fashion. And maybe we can facilitate it ourselves. But you're right, we have to make sure that we're not on that pro or con position. That's not it. It's I guess, good discussion about what is the community and the residents going to find acceptable or unacceptable in-house managed in land use. So it could be either way. I'm just looking at Vince because he's getting a couple different options here. Maybe that's what we come back with next is here's some examples of what we've seen. Not that we follow everybody and what they've done. We have to make it fit for here, but it's going to have the community engagement at some point.
Yeah, and I think, to be honest with you, this is probably jumping ahead of where most communities are, is to get ahead of it. And, so I'll have to look into the Dearborn situation, but most of them have just pretty much just opted out. And I think that in some ways, it's here and there's nothing, whether you're for or against it is immaterial. It's just now let's focus on the land use aspect of it and how can you have a good dialogue to make good rational land use decisions. So.
Exactly. John?
I'm kind of mixed on it. I'm a big proponent of community engagement, but then on the other hand, sometimes there are issues where you need to have something for the community to react to, not just opening it up saying, well, what are your thoughts on this? As far as I'm concerned, 64% of the people voted for recreational marijuana. The strategic part of this is how do you implement it from a land use perspective without impacting adjacent neighbors and adjacent properties? That is necessarily not a decision that I open up to the community, asking the community who's not land use or zoning experts, hey, what do you think? Where should we put these? I think it's incumbent upon the city, that's why I think a facilitator is good, to talk to the council, and really the council, I think, at some point needs to divorce itself from this discussion. It should be a discussion with the Planning Commission, the Zoning Board of Appeals, the Downtown Development Authority needs to be involved in this, the business community, and they need to come up with a series of recommendations on how they want to manage this in the future and then present those to us as the elected officials. That's how, in this situation, that's kind of how I would scope this out, was let's not make it a city council discussion. Let's make it a more of a practical, tactical discussion with the boards and commissions that we have that are going to be faced with the implementation of this, that have the background from a zoning, land use perspective, the business community, get with the Downtown Development Authority, what their feelings are about it, because they're the ones, you're not going to have you're not going to have recreational dispensaries in neighborhoods. We know that they're going to go into commercial districts. So we need to be talking with the commercial property owners on what their feelings are relative to this, and then present those findings to the community so the community has something to react to. That's how I would scope it out.
I think as we get through the information gathering, I think then it's going to be that is presenting to say, here's wherever it comes from, facilitation or town hall, these are the this is what's kind of elevating to the top as far as where and how, and then you're right, then it's going to be the reaction to something specific.
Yeah,
we have to get there first. And I think this is a
the
good start.
The eye opener for me, and I can't remember the numbers, but it was the variation, was that YouTube clip that I sent the council on the Colorado piece, where the young lady that was driving the reporter around said, you have to understand in Colorado Springs, and I'm just using the number, she says, we have 17 McDonald's. We have 154 dispensaries. It got way out of hand because they weren't proactive in terms of how they were going to regulate the location and the use of these. So we got to do it tactically at this point. That's my right. And I'm going to leave them. Personally, Your Honor, I'm going to throw it over in Vince's corner. No pun intended.
Okay.
It's heading down that way.
I think the conversation is good. I think it's clear from the council here that, we need to move forward with some discussion and how we get there. And so I think there's enough information at least to start, unless Vince says otherwise, and see what we come back with as far as what might be going on. If not, then as you said, we are out in the leadership on this.
Yeah, let me do a little more research on it, and if I may, but also I'll draft up like an RFP to see what something would look like. How do we get these stakeholders engaged in this discussion from a land use standpoint, and all of the stakeholders, like Councilmember Lamore mentioned, the police, anybody that's involved with it's gotta be at the table. So schools.
It's a start.
Yep.
And we'll look forward to the follow-up on this. We'll keep moving forward. Next item that you have.
Next item is just very quick. Probably back in October, the mayor, myself, Clerk Treasurer Lavoy, Jody Egan, our communications director, and Pat Weaver in the mayor manager's office. So we sat down and talked a little bit about putting together a volunteer recognition. It is one of the city council's goals. And so when we sat down in October, there was a number of activities going on, and we just didn't find a good time to put it before you. But in summary, we budgeted $5,000 this year, for a recognition. Whether you spend all of it is immaterial. But I think what we looked at doing was bringing in inviting the volunteers at our various boards and commissions. We counted up 93 of them. Maybe have an event in May during Michigan Week. We felt the holiday season there's too many other activities going on. Michigan Week would be a good, appropriate time. It's before the end of the school year, before everybody's engaged in summer activities, and the thought was maybe have something, a light dinner or something at the IHM or some venue here in the community to provide a recognition for the members themselves, provide an update, what's going on in the community, and just a general kind of, just a chance for everybody to get to know one another. In the past, my experience has been very positive where we have these types of events where different groups, particularly even if they sit together at the same table, it's a chance for them to be a little informal with one another and get to know each other a little better. So we'll come back with more details, but certainly I throw that out there. If you're comfortable with it, we'll continue to pursue it and bring it back with some more details in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks. Like it.
I like the Michigan Week connectivity.
Yes.
What that's about, and we're one of the few communities in the state that still host and I'll say celebrate Michigan Week, and I think it's a great connectivity to that and about the volunteers.
Yep. Thank you.
Next item. I see Mr. Lewis coming.
Mr. Lewis is approaching. One of the items we're going to talk one more time about is North Custer Design. He's near completion with the project itself, following up on some of our discussions late last year to move the project forward. And so, Patrick, when it's on the screen, I'll let you go.
Honorable Mayor and Council, Patrick Lewis, Director of Engineering and Public Services. I did push the green button on the mic, so somebody tell me if I'm too loud, because I've also been told I don't need it. So, all right. As you know, back in the fall, late summer, I was in front of you looking at potentially moving this project up into the fall. In hindsight, it's a pretty good thing that we didn't do that because of some of the difficulties in the construction sector last fall. So you can go ahead and tab to the first one here. So I'll repeat the background that we did at that last meeting for those of you that may not remember. And this is actually harder than I thought to have to narrate it, looking over the side. So this was originally our 2021 federal aid project, but as we looked at it, we're biting off West Front Street this year, which will include borrowing funds from 2020. We felt that we needed to move this project up due to its condition. So it was proposed for inclusion in the 2019-20 CIP, which you will be voting on for approval by the end of February. It's a little over a mile in length from the city line, just east of where Munson Park is, to Telegraph Road. We have an approximate cost of about $550,000 for the baseline project, and I'm going to present to you some alternates tonight which would add to that baseline cost. Fairly straightforward project. It's a 3-inch mill and fill. It's on a concrete base. We had not identified the last time it was resurfaced any problems with the base. We were planning to bid this as a standalone project, so we're not going to lump all of our resurfacing projects in there. This is one that doesn't rely on a water main that has to go first, so we think we can get it out early, get it done early. So we're looking at bringing that to you for award either March 4th or March 18th, depending on how quickly we can get the design finished, and the completion date target June 30th. So, as I mentioned, the existing pavement, 3 inches asphalt over an approximate 7-inch concrete base, mill and pave the top 3 inches. Very little curb work required due to the condition. And we are preparing plans. I had mentioned before we could just do this as a log job, but we are putting plans together because we already had the base survey data, so it's not going to take us much to do. But I'm in front of you tonight because we do need some final thoughts on some design elements, and you'll know what those are. So, first and foremost, the islands. You'll notice the header says "Stay or Go." As I mentioned before, in 2006, those were installed at Richards and Cranbrook Drive. Those were intended to calm traffic and provide a small refuge for pedestrians. Obviously, we couldn't get a big refuge area because of the width of the roadway. They're shorter linearly, longitudinally to the roadway than we would prefer because you've got a lot of driveways in the immediate vicinity, so we don't want to block residential driveways. So they're 80 to 100 feet long. They've regularly, I said they've had significant damage. Some of that's our plows, some of that is vehicles hitting them. We were surprised we only had 3 or 4 reported accidents in the last year or two. I think there's a number of them that weren't reported. But one of the things that we did talk about, regardless of what we do, if they stay, we're planning to install more of a rolled curb. They're pretty hard edge, and that was designed to make you feel as uncomfortable as possible. But with North Dixie Highway, we did a little more of a roll, trying to improve upon that, where it's almost like a quarter of a circle. Those seem to have held up a lot better. You can mount those, and they don't get the chips out of them. So we will, even if we leave them in, we'll probably replace the curbs with something a little softer. One of the things we talked about internally is you could actually modify these, move the island and the crosswalk a little farther away from the corner. It seems like some of the damage we get of people turning the corner from Richards and Cranbrook, making a left-hand turn and not hitting that chute, so to speak. So if you push them 10 or 15 feet farther east, it would involve lining the crosswalks up, not where they would extend through to the cross street. That's the only drawback to that. So the first thing we'd be looking for is your feeling about whether the island should stay or go. Now, some of the other alternatives we're going to present here may influence that feeling, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about those. I apologize for the photos. I did the best I could on Friday. I thought it was going to be freezing rain today, so I had to take the pictures on Friday. It was a pretty sunny day, so there's a few shadows in there. But I'll kind of narrate from the photos we've got in the picture. One of the alternates, and I know Councilman Nyquangeli had mentioned this back in August, is something that we hadn't really thought of, but we did take a look at that, and that's what they call the raised intersections alternate. That's designed to mitigate if we were to take the islands out, we wanted to come up with some kind of alternative pedestrian treatment that would result in a little better comfort level, but also greater visibility of the traffic. And you've got raised intersections, and Councilman Nyquangeli's probably looked at a lot of these in other communities he's worked. We're proposing 8 inches here, and there's a practical reason for that. I know there's some that could be quite a bit more than that, and I think on local streets you'd probably be looking at an even higher raise. Here you do have snow plowing considerations and some other things, but what we're faced with here is a constraint on the cross streets. If we go too far up, we're going to be back to working the cross streets back a couple hundred feet to make the grades work, and so that's really the limiting factor here. But if you're looking at that, the curbs, for example, are 6 inches high now. So you'd be raising them a little bit above the height of the curb is where your center line grades would be at both of those intersections. As I mentioned, raising intersections makes drivers more aware of you. There's a unique situation here, higher pedestrian volumes, makes them more visible. And then there's a grade change in the roadway, at least on one of the sides. You would be coming up, I'll speak a little technical here, but most of North Custer actually goes from west to east in one consistent grade. It's like 3 or 4/10% all the way from one end to the other. And so what we'd be doing by raising the intersection is when you got within 100 feet, instead of coming down by a slight grade, you'd come back up. And then on the trailing side, you'd be more like 1%. So you definitely feel it more coming westbound than you would eastbound because you'd be hitting that grade. You'd be able to see it a little more pronounced. We obviously don't want to have something that's going to cause drivers to bottom out with a speed limit of 35 on a major street. So we thought 0.3% going to 0.3% back up, and then about 1% down for 100 feet would be a nice little table there. So that's what you'd be looking at here. I kind of gave you some visuals. The first top and bottom are Cranbrook. One is looking east down there, and the other one's kind of looking sort of northeast from as you were standing on the bike path area, looking towards the bike path. So we'd have some challenges in having to regrade the bike path a little bit going back, so we could blend that grade up a little higher, because as you can see, it already comes up to the roadway. It'd come up even farther. But we've got it to where you can come to the cross streets, and you won't have to rework the drainage structures on either Cranbrook or Richards. The second slide here, the 2 photos will be of near Richards Drive. That gives you a view from the islands, and again, you'd be at a perspective, you'd be about 2 inches above the curbs that are in the island. That's what you'd be looking at for the raised tabletop. So I mentioned the 8 inches again in there. That's what we think is feasible by adding storm sewers on the west side of each of the intersections. I mentioned the whole road goes from west to east. Well, if we raise it with a reverse grade, we'd have to put new storm sewers on the west side to pick that drainage up. If we're going to do it, our recommendation is to do it in concrete because you've got a visual contrast there, which tells you something different is going on. And the fact is we're adding asphalt onto we'd be adding a section in there. So we're still wedging it in there. We're adding material. If you do it in concrete, you're only finishing it once. Now, with that said, there is a cost difference in that because instead of adding just 4 inches of asphalt more, and that's an average from what you'd have averaged over the whole intersection, you'd be actually tearing it out and replacing, which is a little bit more expensive. The largest cost item, and I brought this up here in case I needed it for reference, is if you were to do it in concrete, we'd have to do half the intersection at a time, which means we're probably looking at either a significant detour for one of the directions. If you think about it, you can't get past Richards and Cranbrook unless you're going all the way west to either the Raisinville Road Bridge and around or Bates Lane up to the north. So what we'd be looking at doing is half the intersection at a time with temporary portable traffic signals at these intersections. So that's the difference between a concrete intersection, which we would have to do that for the cure time, versus if you were to do it in asphalt, we could probably accomplish it with flaggers during just the daytime, the day that they're replacing it. So while there's a visual enhancement to going concrete, there's a cost aspect and about a 3-week time where you're going to have some significant delays in the area. So that's why I mentioned it's about $100,000 per intersection in concrete. It's about $70,000 for asphalt. I would still recommend, and we could dance around this a little easier, the crosswalks be done in some kind of treatment like a stamp. I'd like the stamp concrete crosswalks in there. So that's something to consider. The asphalt intersections do include that stamp concrete, which we'd still have to do some plating, but we wouldn't probably have to do a full-blown detour or the portable traffic signal. So those are the cost implications. If you do both intersections, it could be as much as $200,000 on top of what we're proposing. So the other topic that we had at the last time was lane configuration options. Right now, the roadway is 36 feet between curb faces with about 1.5 feet on either side as your gutter. So you've got 33 feet of pavement to work with. Right now, that's about 11 feet lanes. So 11 on the through lanes, 11 on the turn lane, and then you've got the gutters that are considered non-drivable. What it does is it gives you options. At first glance, it seems like we'd be creating a major traffic operational problem by taking out a turn lane, and that might have some truth to it as you get closer down by MB&T at Custer Drive. The other intersections are probably less so. We believe most of our commuter traffic going into Frenchman's, going into Cranbrook, going into Richards Drive is mostly coming from town. So it's coming from the east. Most of those are right turns in. So if you think about it, Elm Avenue has a similar traffic volume or even higher in town, and it's mostly 2 lanes. So can it be done? Yes. Will it take some driver education and some getting used to? Yes. So it was asked to bring back the discussion about whether council would like to see it go to 2 lanes from 3 as both a traffic calming feature potentially and to enhance the bicycle, on-street bicycle use, leaving the bike path, if you will, the 8-foot path more for walkers and kids on bikes, slower recreational bikes, as opposed to more of a speed, I'll say speed route for bicyclists. So we could easily replace the current cross-section with 2 11-foot lanes, 1 in each direction, and 2 5.5-foot bike lanes. And again, that's taking the gutter out. You could make the 2 lanes 12 and make the bike lanes 6, including the gutter. But that's essentially what we'd be looking at. They'd be consistent with the section to the west. The road commission, when they did their part, did actually use some grant funds and widen the shoulders so that they would be like bike shoulders. It's not a full-blown bike lane because they don't meet the AASHTO guidelines, but they are wide enough that they can support bikes in a relatively safe environment. So be consistent. But as you get closer to the east, we would probably need to transition those out and just end those when you got close to Custer Drive so we could provide that turn lane. That, and when you get underneath Telegraph and get in front of the hot dog stand and the YMCA, there's just not room. So that would be the consideration we'd have to make. Obviously, the answer about islands staying or going, if you went to a 2-lane cross-section, they'd have to go. So we could still do the raised intersections with either a 2 or 3 lane configuration as well. So those are not mutually, they are mutually exclusive. So I think then the next slide, if you would, Michelle. I point out too that in any of these cases, we can enhance and beef up our pedestrian signage, and I think we would like to do that. I almost did it in the fall just to do it. But I think we'd rather do it in conjunction with this project to really see a difference. On the right-hand side is an in-crosswalk marker that we have in the downtown area. I think those have gotten pretty good reviews. We love the one out here on the Macomb Street crosswalk. When properly placed, these really can, give you the impression something's in the way. With a 3-lane cross section, these are easy to do. Stick it right in the center turn lane in the one direction where there's no turning movements. Not quite so easy on the side where you've actually got the turning movement. But we've also got some signage here. There's the crosswalk ahead sign, which I think we need to do at all these intersections, as well as the sign with the arrow pointing down. You can see that in the background. So those are the strong yellow-green color, I think, does help with those. Michelle, if you'd advance to the next one. I've given you some other examples. These are not from Monroe, but there's the high visibility crosswalk. That's what we call the ladder. It's got the traditional stripes as well as the boxes. And then the advanced warning markings, we can use those as well, where it's got the PED crossing leading up to it. Little cold plastic doesn't cost a lot. I think all the pavement marking enhancements would be under $1,000 for this. So those are some of the improvements that we've talked about. So here's what we need, because we're trying to get this in the bid queue pretty soon. Islands, stay or go. Do we want to explore raised intersections? And do we want to keep it 3 lanes or convert to 2 lanes with bike lanes? And so, on the right-hand side is I think you should do these in any case. The continental or the ladder crosswalks, unless we're going to stamp them, and of course the stamped would be like, say, taking that to another level. Whenever we can do the in-street signs, we'll do them. And the yellow-green advanced warning signs and the additional text we talk about. I think this is an important pedestrian corridor, so there's where I am. I think I've taken up well enough of your time.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
There's some comments here. I might have some. John?
Patrick, what's your experience with stamped asphalt?
I have none. I'm not necessarily opposed to it, but I have no experience with it.
Is the alley behind McGady's, isn't that stamped asphalt?
No, that's stamped concrete.
Stamped concrete.
Yep,
okay.
that's 8-inch stamped concrete.
But you can do stamped asphalt.
Yes, you
So
can.
you could do the tabletops in asphalt and stamp it to give it that different context when people are driving over it,
Yes, we would absolutely explore those options to do that. Yeah,
which would be cheaper than the concrete.
it would be cheaper than the concrete and easier to construct too. Yeah, we'd definitely give it a shot.
And the 2 lanes would be consistent with the county road section.
That's correct.
Up until you get to MB&T, then you'd go to a 3-lane for the left-hand turns on the Custer.
I think there's enough volume turning left onto that section of Custer. I think you definitely need it there.
Sure. Okay.
We could probably get away. I think we could relatively easily get away with it the rest of the section. Yeah, again, it's the adjustment period, but I think at Custer I would like the turn lane. Everywhere else I think we can live with it without it.
Michelle?
What is the lifetime durability of the asphalt versus the cement?
The traditional comments about asphalt versus concrete, and again, this is tradition, is usually expect about a 15-year life cycle out of asphalt and a 30-year on concrete. Now we're starting to learn there's some challenges. Asphalt, the advantage with it is it does have a lot more intermediate maintenance abilities. You can extend the lifespan another 5 to 10 years fairly easily by regularly crack sealing, which we try to do. Once a road gets to 2 or 3 years old, we crack seal it. And you can do things like a microsurface where it's a small, it's almost just like sand and emulsion that kind of gives that additional skid resistance, helps keep the surface from oxidizing. Concrete, you can get more than 30 years out of it, but what you start seeing before that is your joints start falling apart. That's usually your failure mode. And you start seeing that at 15 to 20 a lot of times. You need to get in there and joint seal it. So the short answer is I think it's more like 20 versus 30 these days. And life cycle cost depends greatly on the market. So you can have 1 year. We've had years where concrete was the answer every time because it was only 10% more than an asphalt street. It's shifted again. We're back to where it's more traditional.
Why is that?
Well, you've got the Chinese economy was one thing that you had a lot more building in the last 5-6 years. There's a lot more environmental concerns now about the production of cement. We've got a lot more environmental controls that are driving that cost up. A better economy. You've got concrete's used in building trades. Asphalt is not. So you got a lot more demand on the material than you had 10 years ago.
I think the other problem too is the curing time. Is the longer that concrete sits without any activity on it, it gets stronger and harder. We don't let concrete cure like they used to 30, 40 years ago.
We do on street construction leave them off for 7 days, and that's typically where you get 80% of your compressive strength. Actually, most of our breaks we get our 28-day strength at 7 days, and that's I can't explain why that's necessarily the case. That's just been our experience. We use a lot of fly ash in the mix because that's an admixture that can replace a lot of the cement. I think that has something to do with it. But we usually get our 28-day strength before we open it to traffic. But that's correct. I mean, you have demands from the public. I can't leave them off their street for 2 months.
Right.
So.
I think the other issue with this is if we go concrete, you're gonna have a significant detour issue. And that is just gonna complicate things.
That is a concern here. I mean, yeah, your detour route not only does it include county roads, but it's 4 miles to
Right.
you know
We don't
around to
wanna-
where you're
we
going.
do not wanna do that.
So
Sounds to be challenging. Michelle,
What-
and then I'll get to Brian.
The weight limits versus one versus the other, is it concrete, I would assume would be a higher weight limit?
it's all on how it's constructed. We've got a concrete base under this roadway, and I know there's been a lot of question about the asphalt surface hasn't lasted as long as we would normally expect on this roadway, and there's a number of reasons. I won't get into that here, but it's basically a Class A route. Whether we resurface it with asphalt over the concrete base that's there, as far as the intersections, that's really all we're talking about. Is just the intersections. We would build it to Class A standards either way, and that's what is contemplated here. So it's apples and apples right now as we've got it presented. Good question though.
Couple more questions, Brian?
Yes, Your Honor. As far as maintenance goes, crack sealing is it available with raised intersections and the stamped asphalt? I mean, obviously you don't have a great experience with the stamped asphalt, but
No, but I can tell you if there's a crack that shows up in it, yeah, we'd have to crack seal it with the black material. So over time, we'd have to reapply it. It would be something we'd probably have to redo the pavement markings I don't know. We do our cold plastic markings as needed. We try to do our long line painting like the center stripes, which are just done by paint. We try to do those every year. Sometimes we let them stretch to 2. Like if we have a good winter, I'm going to let it go 2. But our cold plastic is more a function of, which would be similar to a stamped asphalt, how long till the plows start tearing it up and it looks bad. That's when we'd redo it. You're probably looking at a 5-year cycle on something like that. So we'd probably, if there weren't too many cracks, we'd crack seal it and then we'd replace it the next time.
and right now I'm just looking at the difference in cost. If it's was it 30,000 is what you're saying between the concrete and asphalt? That's not a huge difference. And John does have a good concern in backing the timelines up, but if it's going to last longer without more maintenance, it makes a lot more sense. But that's just me thinking there.
Yeah, no, and my preference over the years had been generally for new streets where, and things where we were doing full rebuilds to do them in concrete. But I think this is another one where we're still going to be on the street doing an asphalt resurfacing of it. There's something to be said for having a consistent material all the way across the roadway too, because otherwise the next time we resurface this in hopefully 20 years, which I hope to not have to do this again during my career, but you may have me for 20 years, a lot of times it's nice to be able to do the whole thing, because otherwise now I got an intersection that's not quite at its life expectancy. I got to leave that and then come back 10 years later and do the intersection. So there's something to be said on either side.
So we've talked asphalt and concrete, and I'm looking at your list up there. There's 3 questions we haven't answered that you're looking guidance for. So as we move along, because we do have one more short item that I know city manager wants to do, but islands, leave or remove, raise intersections, 3 lanes or 2, the big conversations. Any comments from council?
I'll go down the list. I say let's remove the islands. Let's go with the raised intersections with asphalt because of the detour issue.
Mhm.
And let's go to 2 lanes with the exception of converting them to 3 when you get down to MBT in the commercial area.
Okay.
I mean, and go,
Other comments? I'll already,
Just go
Kelly, and
down
I'll come
one.
right back this way.
Yeah,
Kelly?
I would agree with John. I think that we would be better off with the islands gone and bike lanes, which I've heard a lot of comment about people requesting those, as well as the raised intersections. And the asphalt, now that you made that comment, I think makes probably a little bit more sense that you're being more consistent.
Kelly?
I just want to speak on the islands. I used to live in the area, so I know that the pedestrians use the islands a lot, especially at certain times when traffic is heavier, because you might only be able to make it halfway across that road. You have to wait for the other traffic coming in a different direction. So I don't know, how would you put a traffic signal, or how would you allow for the pedestrians to get across the street there to go to the park?
Well, that was the main reason we put them in, to provide some sense of refuge. The problem and the challenge has been, I don't know how safe some people feel, because you're pretty close to the intersection and there's only about 10 feet of island to work with. And so if somebody's driving erratically, that doesn't really afford you a whole lot of protection. We're not intending to, I mean, I think they've worked reasonably well, but we've had our challenges with them. We hadn't planned on doing any traffic signals because neither of those intersections justifies a traffic signal from the cross-street traffic. And, full traffic signal installation can be $50,000 to $100,000 on top of that. So,
But I think from a traffic point of view, we're going from 3 lanes in front of both of the
Right.
Richards and
Cranbrook.
in Cranbrook. So we're going from 3 lanes to 2 lanes, which means that we're going from 36 feet to 22 feet. So that's a narrowing of distance for walkability. And if you have the raised intersection, no one's going to hit that raised intersection at 35 miles an hour. Maybe the first time they will. The second time, they're going to slow up to go, and that's what creates the safety for the pedestrian, because the vehicles are slowing before they go up the raised intersection. Unlike now, where somebody could be in the island and people are still going 35 miles an hour past them.
they were doing it to me when I was taking pictures. I mean, nobody slowed down at all, and I was standing in the turn lane in some cases, so.
And then you have the enhanced markings that are part of
The
it.
enhanced
It's a
markings.
combination of the steps that are being proposed that are to address the concerns that Kelly you have, and I agree that, getting across there at this point, but you're lessening the space to cross. You do have the bike lanes, but then that's something to look at as well.
Now, I don't want to give anyone the impression either, 8 inches is not a lot of rise, so I mean, the hope is that
It's enough.
it's something. It's visible. It's clearly something different is going on, and we can sign it and mark it, and that's the hope. But getting people into 2 lanes, if you've got some left turners, that's another thing that's going to slow, because people are going to be slowing for turns.
Other comments from council, I think in looking at the islands, I think we've heard comments I'll let Andrew go first.
I'm not sworn to the islands, but they've never bothered me. In terms of 3 lanes, I think that you're able to get more traffic through, and I don't know that, I mean, I've lived in that neighborhood my whole life, in both halves of it. I cannot get out of my neighborhood right now without taking North Custer. And I can tell you that the narrowness of those lanes, I've driven a 26-foot U-Haul in the dark, in the rain, down that road, and I didn't really worry about the islands too much.
Right.
Our firefighters drive a fire truck down that road. I don't know who's having trouble with these islands, but unless you're driving a tank down there, I don't really know how it's that much of an issue for you. I think any substantive reduction in the safety equipment that we have there for pedestrians leaves it insufficient in my mind. Everything that we're trying to do to replace that is just a suggestion to slow down. I mean, stopping is right out of the question. If you look similarly at M50, where Front Street goes in front of Waterloo Elementary, which is a similar state, that's a busier road, and there's less pedestrian traffic on that road in terms of crossing back and forth. And we have flashers, school zone, it says down to 25 miles an hour. And there's more pedestrian traffic here on a street that that a speed reduction would be less impactful on, and it's still 35 miles an hour. So you have more traffic and less protection at a higher rate of speed. I don't know that the suggestions have been sufficient. What I would be in favor of, I know that they have these on Ford's campus all over the place, is at the pedestrian intersection, you push a button, and the pedestrian sign has lights on it and lights up. It's not a full crossing intersection, but it's just the pedestrian intersection. It wouldn't be a stop sign, but it is a yield sign. When pedestrians are at that location, you stop, because none of these suggestions are going to accomplish that. And so the islands gave some refuge, understanding the habits of the people that are going to drive on that road, that you're not putting in a stop sign there. We're not putting in a traffic light there. So I just don't know that. I'm not sworn to the islands, but I see these as suggestions to slow down. And in terms of pedestrian safety, I think they're insufficient.
I actually like that suggestion. I hadn't really thought about that, the push button. I've seen those before, where they light up the perimeter of the sign and just alert you to the fact that someone wants to cross.
You put one of those in there, I'll stop hounding you about this.
Well, we'll do some cost estimation on that, and we'll see what the
Need to move
impacts might be.
forward. The islands, they're not sufficient as they are now. So having in there, I think, is a false sense of security for the public, because people making turns can't seem to stop cutting the edge, and they're not turning like it should be turning. They continue to cut the edge. We cut it back further. They still cut the edge and run over the edge of the island. So that's the issue there that I see. But there's not a safe refuge now, and lessening the lanes gives at least less distance to cross. But there are alternatives, I think, that'll bring the some of the more safety awareness. I know that Mr. Pastu, you had one more item, but I don't want to stop. I'm sure you'll get some additional comments and emails from the council.
No, Your Honor, if I may, I would suggest, we were going to talk a little bit about this proposed Spire development. If I could handle that through my city manager comments. I know Councilmember Angeli also wanted to discuss that as well. And so just to provide sufficient time, I think that might be a more appropriate time.
And at the end of the council meeting, without, it would be more of a discussion, information that you're sharing, and not necessarily something that the council's looking to make action on this evening, just knowing that. Andrew?
If I may, just very quickly, I know that you put the speed indicators up at those intersections. I just want to say that I noticed and appreciate. I know they're not on yet, but I noticed and appreciated.
Well, that was the police department's idea. We put them up, so I appreciate.
Thank you to the police department and Chief
Captain
McCormick.
Wall
I
and
appreciate it.
Mike Brooks both had that. So
Captain Wall, thank you.
Couple more, Patrick, is there a reason why we have to have North Custer at this location, 35 miles an hour? Does it impact like major street status, minor street status?
No, the speed limit, our setting the speed limit doesn't have anything to do with that. It's typically, we want to be as consistent with the state guidelines as we can. We dealt with this on Dixie Highway when we reduced that from 45 to 35, when we went from 4 lanes to 3. Now, a lot of that took care of itself because you slowed down traffic because you were governed by the feeling that you might be coming up on somebody, even though the 85th percentile actually dropped there to the point where it was consistent. It's one of two things. Either the 85th percentile speed has to match, what you're signing as close as possible, and that's hard to do because people want to drive as fast as they want to drive. Or there's a driveway spacing criteria, and that's normally used for county roads. And I don't remember off the top of my head what those numbers are. If you have so many driveways every mile, then it should be 45, 35, 25.
Is there any reason why we could not lower the speed limit on North Custer because it is a residential area? We do have houses along North Custer that have driveways. We do have parks.
That's the park issue. You could reduce the speed adjacent to the park. I think you'd want to be a little more consistent with the whole corridor. I think it would be beneficial to have one speed the whole corridor.
What's the speed on East Elm?
30.
Then why don't we do 30?
I'm not sure how we came up with 30 to begin with on Elm, to be honest with you.
I mean,
the state guidelines are 25, 35, and 45 for driveways. There's no 30 in there. I think the mayor could probably speak to that from his old days.
Those are good questions. I think that's something that we ask Patrick to look at and see why it is and why it is elsewhere, and if we can find some information to bring back and then put that into the equation in the discussion.
And I think the only other comment I had, I think when we talked about the raised intersections the last time, was that where the raised intersections are used, they have additional roadway lighting. So when a person's driving down the corridor, the intersection itself is better lit so they can see pedestrian activity.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I'm going to say almost all of our intersections have lighting, have a street light. So I guess it would be a question whether we want to pursue more.
We have 1 minute.
Those are just observations. This is going to be constructed this year?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I appreciate everybody's comments too, because this will enable us to get this design done in the next few weeks.
All right, thanks, Patrick. And
thank
I
you all.
know that we have just a short time, so I'll close the work session, and at 7:30, we'll start the regular meeting, which is in about 7 minutes, 6-7 minutes. Thank you.